my academic journey started with Warwick, actually, and where I did my PhD in the area of internationalization, market exit, and re-entry. And that, I would say, has had a massive impact on the kind of stuff that I do today, although some of my research has moved into other areas like corporate responsibility in international business, or looking at organizational performance in an international business context. So the research interests that I have evolved significantly, but there's still an element of that, looking at multinational firms and their behaviors in different contexts. So I'm still looking at that, but I would say the topics themselves that I study have evolved in line with all that is happening now in the geopolitical environment and in the practical world. I loved international business. So I wanted to do something that was core to the IB world, and that appealed to international business scholars. And it was still around the area of international growth, international entry modes, investment decisions, and so on. And I remember around the time when I was doing my PhD, I think it was probably around year 2, when I also started teaching on my MBA programs. And I had a few managers there, a few directors there, who were in charge of managing the exit decisions of their firms. And talking to them, I realized that actually we focus a lot on the positive stuff that happens with growth, so constantly oriented towards growth and entering new markets and growing into those markets. But actually managers have to make a lot of decisions that have to do with corporate failure. So exiting markets, firing a bunch of people, managing relationships with governments and other stakeholders. So I found that failure element, however defined, more interesting. And we thought, okay, we have a lot of knowledge on international growth. We don't have as much knowledge on divestment, and we don't have as much knowledge on firms that have to go back into previously exited markets, which was also a phenomenon that happens in practice a lot, right? You have a set of markets that are key to your business. You might have to exit them because you're not doing well, but you also have to go back. So I was interested in a core idea in international business, but that core idea had been studied a lot, and I wanted to find a different twist to it. And that twist was looking at re-entry after exiting a market. And of course, the theoretical contributions that can come with that, looking at what happens after the initial entry decision. Well, I think it's the most exciting time for international business or international management scholars than ever, right? And the work that we do is more relevant than ever. And I can see, being in a strategy group at Warwick, I can see a lot of my colleagues who before maybe would never look at institutions or would never look at the context of their firms because the research is more micro, are now interested in understanding how context shapes firm behavior, especially international context. You can be a domestic firm and you're still very much influenced by the geopolitical environment at present. And I would say in that sense, international business work is more relevant than ever, and with more potential than ever to contribute to practice and policy. Now that can be done by looking at investment decisions, which is the bread and butter of international business, but also by looking, if we talk about policy, by looking at SDGs, right? SDGs require multiple countries to come together, more firms within those countries to come together and impact positively on the environment, on society. Whether we talk about SDGs more general or whether we talk about global value chains in IB. So that's the potential to impact policy. How do we actually set the scene to make sure that different countries and firms within them contribute positively towards society, towards the environment? Whether you talk about climate change more broadly or whether you talk about societal issues like working conditions in global value chains, for example. And to give you an example to that, some years ago we had, and I'm sure many of your audience might know this, but we had the Rana Plaza disaster in Bangladesh, right? Now, for the longest time, the activities of firms in global value chains was only of interest to IB scholars. Strategy scholars would care about firms selling their products, how well that's going, and how those decisions are made. Now, after that disaster, it became very obvious that a multinational company can do a lot of good, but can also do a lot of harm in a lot of different markets. Now, that people writing about that, both in the media, but also in academic articles, has led to actually firms reconsidering their health and safety standards in different parts of the world. So you look at every emerging market now, and the working conditions are significantly better because now firms are becoming more aware that these things people are becoming more knowledgeable about these things. And when I say people, I don't just mean our readers of academic articles, but also average people who maybe were not necessarily as aware of what's happening in the broader environment. So I would say IB is becoming more relevant to different types of stakeholders. Our research can have more impact because of the geopolitical changes that are happening and how that's impacting on firms and the role of big firms to make a difference positively or negatively. And with regards to contribution to practice, it's different for every type of research. I would say if you look at a lot of my research, for instance, looks at organizational behaviors. So we can't always be very prescriptive with the kind of work that we do. But those studies that look at performance, or those studies that look at performance across different markets, and again, how geopolitics is impacting that, could certainly have some do's and don'ts for managers interested in continuing to grow their business, right? Despite deglobalization trends, we still have big firms that have to go into different markets to be able to survive and maintain their size. So yeah, in a nutshell, geopolitics and everything that's happening is, of course, bringing a lot of uncertainty. But from the perspective of someone joining the IB community or the IM, the international management community, is the most exciting time because people are watching and are looking at this kind of stuff, and I think they're more interested to read it than in the past. Well, because I'm interested in aspects related to social responsibility or sustainability, I'll probably say that, right? It's becoming more important, and it's becoming of more interest to IB because a lot of the good stuff that happens in terms of contributions to society, but also a lot of the bad stuff that happens in terms of pollution, oil spills, working condition problems, they are also caused by multinational firms. Because multinational firms are responsible for most of the trade. So they have the potential to cause harm, but also significant economic benefits. So in terms of topics that are most popular, as co-editor-in-chief of MBR, I can say that I see a trend in the last few years from people submitting work to MBR. And MBR, for those who might not know, is a very core IB journal, one of the oldest journals in IB actually, which used to publish mostly just macro studies. So anything about country advantages or FDI, that was basically what we used to publish in MBR. Now it's moved towards more submissions on sustainable growth, SDGs and how that means in different countries, the digital space and how technology can be used to make businesses more sustainable or make processes more efficient, open strategy, right? So some of our most downloaded and cited works are actually in the space of strategy and digital strategy linked to international business decisions. So if I were to think of topics that are becoming more important, I would say topics around sustainability, and I use this as a broad term, and topics around the role of technology, both in helping businesses grow, but in helping businesses grow sustainably. If we look at the most downloaded papers in the last year or the last couple of years, this will be it. Stuff around sustainability, stuff around geopolitics, of course, and the relationships between countries and how that affects firms, and the digital bit and how digital strategies, automation, 3D printing can have an impact on firms. The other area that I think is really important, of course, and more difficult to progress with is multidisciplinary work. I remember we had a special issue a couple of years ago in MBR on finance, IB and finance. And essentially the papers in the special issue looked at how IB and finance, both theoretically and empirically, can sort of work together to produce something, and why finance is so important and finance theories are so important in IB and vice versa. And that special issue did really well and got downloaded and cited a lot. So multidisciplinary work is needed because, just to give you an example, when we talk about sustainability as IB scholars, we'll talk about broad issues in sustainability, we'll talk about strategy, but When sociologists or psychologists talk about sustainability, they bring a different perspective. When ecologists talk about sustainability, they bring a different perspective. Now, it is, of course, very difficult to bring these fields together. But to me, we'd produce much better work if we were to really understand some of these issues that different stakeholders are dealing with, that we perhaps don't capture in our current research. And also, it would be more impactful. So I would say multidisciplinary work, difficult to achieve, difficult to publish, of course, but really important. And when people do it, it seems to be received well by our audience. What worked for me was choosing, when you do a PhD, just think about the problem that you want to solve in the world with your topic. And why is there need for that particular research, and being very passionate about it. Of course, the work that you do during the PhD could change, and over time you develop other interests, but it is really important to have a topic that solves some sort of problem. Also, when you talk about it in conferences to other people, to other researchers. The second thing is thinking about the audience for that. I think it's really important. And maybe it contradicts a little bit some of the things I mentioned earlier about multidisciplinary work, but you have to have a main audience. So who are the people who are going to read, review, be interested in your work, maybe potential collaborators in the future? So is it international business, core international business? Is it international strategy? Is it management? Who is the audience for this? Who's your community? And engage with that community. I remember when I did my PhD, I went to all the conferences that I could have gone to. And I presented my work 10, 20 times. And that was reflected then when I submitted my work, because I probably found all the problems that reviewers would have found when reading it. So getting out there and promoting one's work is really important, because then when it comes to then entering the job market, then those people who are at conferences will know who you are and are more likely to give you a job, are more likely to recognize your name when you submit a paper, are more likely to want to work with you. And there's never as much time as you have when you're actually doing the PhD to do these things. And then when it comes to the actual topic, what I did, and I think that helped a lot, was to develop my own data set. At least part of the data that I had was collected by myself. So I went out there, looked at media articles, and collected information about exits and re-entries. Because actually managers were not documenting in their annual reports. Managers don't have to document exits from specific markets. So they don't report country by country investment. So it would have been really difficult to collect that from anywhere else. So I used the media to collect all that, and I put together my own data set. And that's still something original, and no one spent the time to read what I think it was almost 1 million media articles to code them and then come up with something. So it's still something that I can use today. So producing your own data, developing something new, and being super passionate about the topic. And again, like I said in the beginning, not necessarily listening to everyone else's opinion about your topic. Of course, it's important to get feedback, but it's also easy to get lost in what others think is a good strategy to progress. Again, when I did my PhD, of course you listen to your supervisor, and of course you'll take advice on what to do or not to do. But one thing that you have to remember, when people will give you that advice, even your supervisors, even colleagues, and especially people you meet at conferences who've just heard your research, no one cares about it more than you do, and no one pays as much attention as you do. So no one is as informed as you are. You are an expert in that particular area. I remember when I did my PhD, I did a review of the literature, so I read over 1,000 papers. So I knew every single piece of work published in a decent journal in the area of internationalization. So at that point, I could take advice, but I knew what was within my scope, what wasn't within my scope. And of course, all those people who published were at the conferences, they were there to comment. But because I knew that literature so well, when I got a comment, I knew whether the comment was relevant or not for me. I knew whether it was a particular variable that I needed or didn't need, and that was justified in the paper. So the boundaries of what I was doing were very clear because I had read every single study in my field. So that's a starting point. Whether you end up publishing, I also published 2 reviews actually from my literature review in my thesis. But whether you do that or not, it's a second problem. But fundamentally, read what has been done in your field. And if you go to a conference, if you enter a discussion with someone, be prepared to say, this is what I'm doing, this is not what I'm doing. This is what I tell my PhD students. First year, you take the comments, you're probably nervous, it's fine. Second year, you again take the comments, you probably get lost. Third year, you have to defend. At that point, if you've spent 2 years reading about something, whether it was during the MRes, Masters in Research as we call it, or when you were actually working on your PhD, but fundamentally, if you've spent 2 years thinking about a topic, by year 3, you should be able to defend it rather than that's your turf, right? You're defending your turf. Of course, there will be things that you haven't thought of, and you make a note of that, but fundamentally, at that point, you're defending your topic. And I remember I had a lot of people who actually, in the end, became my reviewers and accepted the paper, as I found out later down the line, who told me the research is not worth doing. If I'm not finding anything different or anything controversial, why do it in the first place? And I took no notice of that. So after a while, you have to be able to convince others that the research is worth doing and worth reading, and you're worth collaborating with because you're very competent in what you're doing. And I think people need to develop the confidence to do that because it is a really harsh environment. Academic publishing can be really disheartening. It's a rat's race, we call it. And you have to really like the rat's race, and you have to really focus on wanting to publish and the process itself, not just the outcome. The outcome comes as a result of the process. You know, it's literally the more papers you send, the more likely you are to get published, as long as you do quality work overall. And someone, you know, was saying about that, and I have quite a few papers. Some of them are very good, others are just probably average. But the reason why I got published is because I just submitted a lot of papers. You know, I must have submitted 10 papers to JIBS to get 2 published. And the same goes for others. So for every paper that I published, I probably submitted 5 or 6. They were probably better, or not, but didn't make it. So it is really harsh, the publishing world, and it's becoming even harsher maybe. But when you get it done, it's also really rewarding. And I think, yeah, it's an amazing industry to be in because you meet a lot of amazing people throughout the process. But yeah, you have to, after a while, as a PhD student, you have to be able to defend your turf, and you're the one who has to convince people that it's worth doing, not the other way around. No, thank you so much. You guys are fabulous. Thank you.